Like I think as I was preparing for this, I found that there are many ways I think that I can describe what you do, but the title you seem to like is professional misbehaver. So, for the audience, could you explain what professional misbehaving means?
Sure. Well, professional misbehaving came out of a book I wrote about 15 years ago. The book was in response to, in 2009, the US economy crashing and all of my work as a comedian and entertainer uh, being canceled and nothing happening because there were no events happening around that time. The meeting and event industry is one of the first things that gets struck off the line item on the budgets of corporations when there's a downturn. So there were no meetings happening. So there was no work happening for me. And I sat down to try and write a book, as you've just gone through, but without the benefit of having any idea where to start. And I remember sitting there for a couple of days, like 2 days, and nothing would come out. And I'm just like, what do I write about? I have nothing to write about. I was an entertainer at that point. Um, even I didn't even speak. I was a silent comedian. And so I wanted to maybe be a speaker. That's why I was writing the book. But I was like, I don't even talk. What am I going to say? And it took me 2 days to figure out, oh, well, what I have are stories. I have stories, life stories, things I've been through, things that have happened, things I've seen. And so I just started writing them down, just out of memory, like what are the notable events of my life? And it was only after several months of just writing down story after story that I asked myself, well, what are these about? What's the through line here? How do these all fit together? And what the pattern that I saw eventually from looking at that was that I just like breaking rules, especially social rules, ways that people complicitly go around behaving in ways that to me often feel like lacking in energy or vitality or risk or fun. And so that's always bothered me. And even as a kid, I would always poke at those limits and always want to do things to just stir the pot. And so that's where that term came from, is I realized when I was looking for a title for the book, the title came first. I realized that what I was writing about were rules that were born to break. And then the second part was realizing, oh, I'm a professional misbehaver. So that's where that came from.
One thing that I think really captures the first rule, which is to be normal for those who are yet to read it. I think your waiter gig really captures why we need to break that rule. And that's I don't know if you remember this, but that's actually the reason I got in touch with you because I
I
saw
remember
I
that.
yeah, I saw your waiter gig
Well, you
and
should
I
let people know what you mean
yeah.
by waiter gig.
So if you could explain the waiter gig and what that is.
Okay, so I'm a corporate presenter, and by accident, many years ago, I stumbled on, by doing a bit of improvisation in the moment, I stumbled on the ruse of dressing up identically to the serving staff at a corporate event and posing as a server. And when I first tried it, I thought everyone was going to know that I was just goofing around. But I was in the banquet hall and I just put on a server apron and I went out and I was being odd and rude and eccentric, thinking everyone was going to start laughing. And instead, I just got dirty looks. And so I kept trying to be more broad and eccentric and weird. But people just got more and more upset. And then I realized, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is so much fun to like punk everybody. And so that after I did that the first time, and then I revealed I was actually the entertainer, and people just completely lost it. They were like, "Oh my God, we've been totally fooled." And so I've kept it ever since then. So the bad waiter routine is every gig that I do, I start out dressed identically to the serving staff, posing as a server. And over the course of the meal, I get more and more inept, odd, and eccentric. So by the end of the meal, everyone is in whispered conversation about how the heck did this guy ever get his job? How is he keeping it? What should we do? Should we go to the manager? Should we confront him directly? So that's the gig I do.
What are those events that actually lead someone to live a life like this? I don't know if you've been told, but this is really unique. Yeah, I've not met anyone like you in real life or online. And so I'm just wondering, uh, what were those key moments that led you to this life of performance, let's call it?
Oh gosh, I don't know. If we had a psychologist here, they would probably have an answer. They could, if someone knew my background, I'm sure it would involve starving for attention, afraid of being invisible. Also, I discovered in the last 2 years that I have autism, and I'm in my 60s, and I never knew that I've been functioning with autism my whole life. We kind of stumbled on the fact because we found out my son, who's 15, has autism. And then when he started taking the tests and I started looking at the tests he was taking and like going, wow, this really looks familiar, realizing that I have a lot of autistic traits. So so being neurodivergent this is very, I don't know if this is where you wanted to go with this answer, but it's pretty interesting because like when I do the waiter routine, I was telling my wife this the other day, the waiter is this completely nervous, awkward, fearful, insecure character. So I said to my wife the other day, I feel more myself when I'm acting like the waiter than I do at any other time, because there's a part of me that's so socially anxious and awkward and inward that when I get to play that character and I get to just be scared and nervous and awkward, and I just feel right at home. And so I think for me, because it's been hard for me to connect with people. It took me a long time to learn how to connect one-on-one and just have a conversation with people and really just be myself. And I think performing was a way for me to feel like I was getting some connection with people, but still be in control of the situation. Because if I'm on stage, I get to call the shots. I get to decide what we do next and where we go. And so I think it was a way for me of getting to feel like I was in charge of my connection, but also get the connection at the same time. And it took me decades to be able to really have a decent conversation off stage with people. Just very, very awkward socially. And I've come a very long way since then, but it's taken a long time and a lot of fearful practice of moving toward especially more personal connections.
I must say you are really good one-on-one, like in a conversation, and I really can't imagine you not being comfortable with this. Perhaps that's what I want to ask you about your relationship with discomfort, because I think a lot of performance is being uncomfortable and being another person, as it were. And you were saying that oddly makes you feel more like yourself. So how do you relate to discomfort?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do I relate to discomfort? I think my first response to discomfort is, am I avoiding something here? Because often if I presume you're talking about emotional discomfort. So if I'm emotionally uncomfortable, I'm like, okay, what am I afraid of? What am I avoiding? Because usually the best way out of that is to move toward the thing that is making me uncomfortable. And it's not comfortable in the moment to move toward it, but ultimately I've learned over a long period of time, it's in my best interest to actually move toward the thing rather than avoid it, because that just makes my anxiety worse. So I would say discomfort is I don't like it, and it makes me want to avoid, but I've just learned over the years that my best bet is to move toward whatever that is, because otherwise I'm just going to be more uncomfortable in the long run emotionally.
With performance, at least whatever little performance I've done, plays in school or things like that. I remember being really, it was nerve-wracking, to say the least. And with something like what you do, performing like keynote speeches, uh, yeah, good. Let's talk about keynote speeches because, uh, from what I understand it, you're just given like the context and you adapt personal stories from your life to fit that context. So could you describe that, the process of how you work for a keynote speech?
Yeah, well, so I'll do keynotes for corporate events or associations, nonprofits, whatever the organization is that needs a speaker. And once they decide, yes, we would like you to present, it's a process of having a conversation with the stakeholders of the meeting who are part of the organization to say, okay, what's going on? Why are you having this meeting? What do you hope the outcomes will be? Um, what are the issues and struggles that you're dealing with right now? What are the guests facing? What are the challenges that they face on a regular basis? And it's getting that information up front that allows me or any speaker the opportunity to tailor a message that will serve them. That will be something that's useful to them to hear, or inspiring, or educational. And it's a very creative process because there's two parts of it. One, I spend a lot of time making inventory of my notable life experiences. When things that have happened in my life, or when things happen currently, I take note of them, and I'm like, oh, there's a story in here. And all good stories have four basic parts. They have a problem. They have people or characters in them. They have a place, and they have a perspective. And so, when for any story, if you right away let people know, what's the tension or what's the conflict that was present here, then you introduce the characters. Who are the people that were involved, and really show something about who these people really are. Then paint the scene. Where is this happening? What are the smells, touch? What are the smells, textures, sounds, sights? Where am I? And then lastly, perspective. Usually when there's some kind of tension or conflict that's present in a circumstance, and if you stay with that circumstance, what comes out of it is some form of transformation. So there's a learning that happens if you stay in that circumstance. I'm sure your book is full of these, where your encounters in the wild, where you don't run away, or you can't run away and you have to deal with some sort of situation or encounter. But then what happens on the backside of that is whatever voice was present in the conflict that was saying, this is terrible, or I need to run away, or this is impossible, or I'll never get through this. On the backside of that, there's a learning. There's some sort of insight into, oh, I see that it was actually a good thing that I stayed with this, or there was a solution that was unexpected, or I learned that I'm more resilient than I thought I was. So when you touch on all four of those parts of a story, people are moved and inspired by that. When we speak from our own life experience, it makes us credible. It makes it easy for people to connect with us. There's empathy. There's a sense of authenticity for the people who are on the receiving end of the story. They're like, oh, this person is really sharing something real about their life. So stories are just the most powerful way to communicate. We literally think in stories. Like, neurologically, other human beings, are designed to look for the story in whatever we're saying. And even those 4 parts that I named, I discovered this when I was doing some research on just background on our neurological makeup. So when you introduce a problem, the neurotransmitter cortisol gets released into the bloodstream or I don't know, it's the bloodstream. I'm not a neuroscientist, but anyway, cortisol gets released, and cortisol says, pay attention. There's something important happening here. And then when you describe people in such a way that others can really empathize with that character, oxytocin is released. And then when you describe a scene, rich detail of things, dopamine, another neurotransmitter, is released. And finally, when there's a problem, but then there's a resolution or some kind of aha moment, endorphins are released. So I've called it, so cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, it's code. The acronym is code. So the storytelling code is problem, people, place, perspective. And you hit all these, you get all these neurotransmitters firing, and people cannot not listen to you because you're chemically engaging them. So the idea there is then when you inventory your life stories and you've got a whole bank of them, a library of them, then when you listen or hear the C-suite of an organization say, well, this is what we're dealing with, and we're really having communication trouble, or everyone is very risk averse here, so we're not creating new things, then I can just go to my stories about those subject matters and start designing a keynote that uses my own life experiences to illustrate things that are going to inspire or illustrate a point about how growth, either personal or professional growth or organizational growth, can be accessed by that group.
You know, this is exactly where I wanted to get to with this interview, to the power of stories, which is something that I think you write about a lot. So there's some really good stuff here. I think we need an example. If you could walk us through one of your, I'm sure you have like a go-to story, one of those stories that can really be molded into different situations. So could you like walk us through that and fit it into the code framework as it were?
So one time I was doing the waiter routine I got hired for an event here in Canada, and it was the Canadian Psychiatry Association. So there were 400 psychiatrists in a ballroom, and they hired me to do this waiter routine, going table to table, being, completely wacko. And so over the course of the meal, all these psychiatrists who are trained to detect and diagnose when people have behavior that is alarming or odd or just aberrant, just, not usual. So everyone, pretty much everybody in that room had a clinical diagnosis for my condition, which they thought was a real thing. And so I was doing this waiter routine, and by the end of the meal, one of the psychiatrists who'd been watching me very carefully throughout the evening, I do this last bit of business as the waiter at the end, usually, where I trip and fall over a tray of metal plate warmer covers. So it just as I make this big racket, and I'm laying down on the ground, and this psychiatrist leapt out of his chair, and he came over to where I was laying down on the ground, and he picked me up off the ground. He was a big guy. I'm not small myself. He lifted me right up, and he turned me around to face him, and he made very deliberate eye contact. He said, "Are you okay?" And everyone in the audience was watching because they had heard the big commotion. They all looked. He came over, and everyone was looking at us, and I wasn't ready to give away yet. I wasn't ready to reveal that I'm the keynote speaker. So I just said very quietly to him, I said, "Yeah, I'm okay," trying to indicate by looking at him very lucidly that really everything's okay. but he didn't buy it. And he was just like, well, are you sure? That was a pretty bad fall. I think you should come over and sit down for a minute. So I didn't want to sit down because I had to finish what I was doing. So I looked at him again, and I'm trying to be very lucid just so he can get, there's no problem here, without telling him that I'm an actor, right? So I just said, really, I'm okay. And he said, well, you may feel okay, but I think you and I ought to go for a little walk. And he was absolutely convinced that I was in need of some kind of intervention, because in his professional, his assumptions based on his profession, and he's like, this is what he does for a living. And he's like, this is what's happening, and I know what's needed here, and I'm going to intervene. So this guy is coming with me. And so I had to finally level with him, and I had to say, I am an act. I have been hired by your association management to do a comedy show. I'm about to get on stage and start a juggling routine. And I said it with just so much conviction, but he took that as like some kind of schizophrenic, paranoid, like he thought I was really just, going off the deep end. So he doubled down. By this time he had a grip on both of my arms and shoulders, and he's now, about to put me in a headlock. And the woman who hired me was in the audience, administrator of the association. She got up out of her chair. She had to come over to where we were standing in front of the room, and she puts her hand on the guy's shoulder and she says, Frank, I hired this guy. This is our entertainer. And he just went on tilt. His brain just went on scramble. He looked at me and he dropped his arm. He let go of me. He dropped his arms to his side, and he just started looking at the floor. He was just staring at his shoes, and he turned around and he walked out of the ballroom, and he did not come back the rest of the evening because he could not process that the update that he was getting about what was really going on did not match his way of looking at things, his view, his assumptions about what was going on. And so I tell that story in relationship to that. That's a very useful story when it comes to talking about change, perspective, open-mindedness, the willingness to be in relationship with other people, listening, communication. There's so many different ways that story can be useful. But so, right away, there's the problem. I'm a waiter with a bunch of psychiatrists, and the tension, the problem builds. Then you've got the characters, me, and you've got the psychiatrist, the woman who hired me. And then you've got the place, where are we? We're in this ballroom. It's a corporate event. And then lastly is the perspective of what do we learn from this? And sometimes the perspective part of a story is that learning doesn't take place. So in this case, it's very poignant that this man doesn't make the leap. He doesn't transform in that moment. Who knows what happened to him later? But that's very often the case. It's very human that we come up against a call to change or transform our behavior or our point of view, and we can't do it. I mean, that's very common. And so telling a story like that can be very impactful and very illustrative of our human tendencies and human behavior. So that's a story I've told many, many, many times, because it's very utile and flexible in terms of how it can be shared or used or spun a little bit this way or that, depending on what the organization is facing.
I just can't imagine what was going through your head. I mean, I'm sure I would have been panicking because this is such a deliberate thing, but this man is approaching you out of concern. And so, I mean, that's really something. So I wonder, I think what you said was so interesting about creating a bank of stories. I think you only told me to do this. I have like a Google Doc where I just have one-liners, and I know that when I read that, I remember a certain story. I don't know why, but this is just to recall. So, like, what is your pitch to someone to create like those like a bank of story-worthy moments? Like, how do I search for those story-worthy moments in my life?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I actually this year spent about 5 months developing and building an app to do exactly this. And because so you can do it just the way you described, you can do it very simply, just like you've got a Google Doc with a line in there just to remind you, jog your memory. So that's perfectly fine. The app I developed allows you to, when you remember a life event, you put it into the app. And then because you start with your birth date when you open an account, when you register the story, did I just freeze on your end? Okay. Um, so when you remember the story, almost always when people think of a story, they'll either remember the date that the story happened, like the year and month, sometimes the exact date, or they remember how old they were. And so when you remember the story and you put in the one line to remind you, you can also tell the story. So there's an audio capture. So if you want to just tell the story out loud, you can tell the story into the app as well. But then you just say, oh, I was 12, or I was 20, or it was 1984. And then it automatically takes that story and it seeds it chronologically into the list. So you get to start seeing the chronological unfolding and patterns of your own life experience. You can tag those stories by subject or theme or by people or place. So it gives you a very robust way of organizing all those stories for future reference, and you can search on them. You can, or just browse the list and see, just get to see, oh, but this is the order that things happened in. So, so yeah, if someone's really interested in a very fascinating, interesting exercise in story inventory, the app does this fully. That's at allmystories.com is where the app is. And right now I'm using it as it's kind of a life narrative tool. So I do a whole onboarding where I spend a couple of hours with the person, helping them to build out the platform in such a way that it naturally will prompt them. So there's categories and there's collections. So by having a conversation with the person, we actually seed it with categories and collections that helps them in future kind of remember all of these life events.
I could have really used this in the whole book writing process.
Right,
Uh,
right.
I think, I'm sure when you wrote your book as well, especially since your book is about the power of storytelling and breaking those rules, like I had to do this, journaling of sorts, where you're really trying to understand which event happened before and what story takes prominence, which is another thing I really struggled with, like choosing between your stories because they're all your experiences, right? I'm sure, like, how do you do that? How do you decide that this story is stronger and therefore should be talked about, whereas this could perhaps be left by the wayside?
I try a lot of different ones. I don't actually know that until I tell them. And when I've told them a couple times in public, you get a sense of what stories really resonate with people and really work in different environments. Like, some stories will work better in writing, others in telling. It's just a matter of experimenting with them and finding out what lands with people.
I I do have to say, while listening to your story about this psychiatrist who was really concerned about you, I think part of the reason that story really works is also your inflection. I think you have identified points in the story to pause on or to emphasize, and I just wonder, is that Is that a deliberate, like, how have you crafted the delivery of that story or stories in general?
I would say if I had to give an answer, it's by paying attention to the audience. Because when you can see and feel how people are impacted by certain moments, that there's something for them to digest, or they have a certain look on their face, or they get, they look shocked or surprised or enthralled, or they're laughing. Where there's an emotional response from the audience, you learn to take a breath. And that's really important. I would say that's one of the most important things for anybody who wants to communicate better as a speaker is slowing it down. It's just, you're in charge. People aren't going anywhere. You get to decide what the pace is, and slowing down and giving people the opportunity to really register what you've just said. Or if there's something that you feel is very important and you say it, and then you get to just sit there and take 3 seconds and let it sink in. And people really appreciate that. It signals a kind of authority. And the more you rush when you speak, the more people feel it gives off the sense of nervousness or not being in charge. Like, oh, I have to rush through this because people don't really want to hear from me, or they're going to get bored, or no matter how you think it's going, one of the best things you can do as a speaker is slow down.
That really hits. I think anyone, even just performing in general, I can, at least I speak for myself, would want to get it over quickly. Like there's that what they call it, stage fright. Yes, stage fright is the term. So I love that. Let's talk about your writing, because that's correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, Writing weekly is something that you have started more recently compared to your speaking. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been speaking for a long, long time. The writing has been about 4 years, 4.5 years when I started blogging, posting in earnest. And it's probably been 2 years that I've been writing every week.
I think of your newsletter as the weekly dose of the importance of storytelling. Let's put it that way. Yeah, and I mean I'll link everything in the thing for our listeners. I I wonder how you think about the difference between those two mediums. The spoken medium and the written one. What are the differences? What are the differences you see in both of them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's more overlap than there are differences. I run into people frequently who say, oh, I'm a speaker, but I don't write, or I'm a writer, but I could never be a speaker. And I always like to challenge people on that, because I think either you're a communicator or you're not a communicator. And if you're a communicator, you're obligated to have competency in both speaking and writing. Because if you're a writer and you see some success with your writing, you're going to wind up like this, interviewing somewhere, or having in some way to represent your writing through conversation. And same is true if you're a speaker. People often say, oh, if you want to speak better, you just need to go out and get experience speaking. And I actually disagree. I think if you want to be a better speaker, the first thing you should do is write. Because if you have your ideas in order, if you really take the time to know what your stories are, what you care about, what your values are, how you uniquely articulate your domain of expertise. If you've done that, speaking is not that hard. Things will flow. It's pretty natural if you've spent time working with your ideas. And if you don't, and you just expect to go in front of a room and start speaking and that things are going to get better for you if you just do that over and over, I disagree. I don't think that's the way in. So writing is, I would put writing first before speaking. And there's definitely overlap in terms of they're both communication forms that we're obligated to have to do both. But then yeah, and then obviously there's the big differences of being face to face with people in front of a room, or a small group of people, depending. There are many, many logistical challenges and tips and tricks for actually being physically in front of people that, of course, don't come into play with writing. There's a lot of that.
I'm going to ask you to dig deep on this one. Like, what does writing do for you mentally? Like,
Wow. I mean, there's so much that can be said about that. You know, I don't know what I actually think until I write. I and I think I might think I know what I think, but then I start trying to write it. I'm like, oh, wait a second. This is confused, or I'm of two minds about this, or I can't find the words to describe my experience or my values, or so writing is a way of finding out more than it is a way of telling. It's more a way of discovering what's here, what I think, what I might even say that the universe wants me to say something that's useful, and I can't know what that is until I've worked with writing, worked with the language. Because what writing does is it takes a intangible experience that involves feeling and emotion and mood and a lot of nuance of what it means to be human, and it forces me, or allows me, to find the language that can serve as a bridge for that inner experience to reach another person. And that's just not something that happens automatically. That's not. So what it does for me, I would say it's a tremendous tool of connection. Writing is. It allows me to articulate what my experience is in a way that other people can actually get a sense of what it is, and I feel seen or heard, or the other person then is able to respond, and I hear from them. So, you know, it's the basis of relationship.
what's your writing process? How do you get your ideas into something that is coherent?
I mean, usually there'll be a memory that comes to me of a life experience, a story of some kind, or something that's just happened. And I'll sit down and I'll just use that formula or format I described: problem, people, place, perspective. And I'll just start with roughly at that level, just getting down the rough elements of that, and then just start to work it from there. Just start trying to unfold, make it flow, enrich, take out stuff that really doesn't matter or doesn't belong. Yeah, it's interesting. Now I go right into the Substack draft, and that's where I write and edit, is right in Substack until it just feels done.
Are you a big podcast guy?
I'm not.
Yeah.
I do listen occasionally, but I'm not a big podcast person.
So there's this one podcast where it's called The Diary of a CEO. It's a very famous one where the tradition is that the guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who they are or what they are, and then they answer the question that was left for them, which I thought was like, that's such a brilliant way of doing things. Obviously, I'm not going to copy. But right now, what I thought as the ending question, something that I thought of. What is something that you could write on billboards across the world? Like, say you had access to every billboard on every highway, on every or on every road in every city. What is the message that you would write over there for the world?
That's cool. I like that question. If I could write, so what do I get? How many words? How
You
many?
can you can take this however you'd like.
Okay. Well, this is just coming up because it's something I'm thinking a lot about right now. If right now someone said you have this opportunity, you need to decide in the next 5 minutes, I would say I would write in the billboard 6 words, and the 6 words would be, "You have permission to be afraid."
Oh, okay. I knew I said that was going to be the last question, but you have to explain that. So there's some stuff that, like, why? Okay, why?
But I don't. It's just on the billboard. Like I'm not going to be there to explain it to people. It's just going to sit there, and people are going to go, "What?" I mean, I want to write about this because I think it's the number one thing. People think they need all sorts of things for success, or say if you're a writer. I think there's only one thing that we all need, that's permission to be afraid. And we don't give ourselves permission to be afraid. We think that's a bad thing. I shouldn't be afraid. I shouldn't do anything that makes me feel afraid. That means I'm moving in the wrong direction. And I think if we gave ourselves permission to be afraid, like it's okay to move towards something, or it gives you permission to fully live if you give yourself permission to be afraid.
I think we'll let that ruminate with the listeners. Really, really. Like, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ishan. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Good luck with all of your stuff, and hope maybe we could do it again sometime.
Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have 3 small requests to ask you. If you enjoy listening to the episode, then please subscribe. Second, please share this with someone who you think will find it valuable. You see, a lot of effort and time goes into creating these podcasts. And so by sharing it, you'll help me reach new audiences, and that'll help keep the show alive. Third, please tell me your thoughts. You can reach out to me on social media, on email, and so on, and tell me what you enjoyed, what you didn't like, and new guests and episodes that you'd like to have discussed on the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.